It's wild how quickly we take new stuff for granted. Pokemon has been going on for more than 2 decades now, and it can be very easy to forget what new stuff's been added and when exactly it was introduced. With that in mind, I'm extra thankful to the 3rd generation of Pokemon for introducing Pokemon abilities, because without them, this franchise would be a hell of a lot more boring. Whenever you next get the chance, I implore you to play or replay the first 2 generations of Pokemon. They're a little dated in a lot of places, some areas more than others, but you won't feel it any more than in the lack of Pokemon abilities. They've been a fundamental part of Pokemon since 2002 and have helped to give so many Pokemon character and a practical use that they wouldn't otherwise have. It's not always about stats, sometimes it's about the talent that you're born with. That's a bad lesson to take out of all of this. It's worth remembering what abilities do for certain Pokemon and how some get their entire identity from the abilities that Game Freak decided to give them in an atypical moment of weakness. Without Wonder Guard, Shedinja literally wouldn't function as a Pokemon, and there's a lot of legendaries out there that would struggle to make much of an impact without their insanely powerful abilities, and for that exact reason, I won't be talking about any exclusive abilities, since, in my opinion, it's more interesting to talk about abilities that are shared over a group of Pokemon. Besides, any ability that negates all damage that isn't super effective is always gonna be the best, and how boring a video would that be? I don't need any help to be boring, come on. Before making this video, I knew that I'd end up including at least one really common ability. Not just for being common, but when I'm ignoring exclusive abilities, I think it's only natural that I end up at the feet of an ability that's shared amongst a few dozen Pokemon that helps to elevate them above others. Levitate does more than simply elevate some chosen few Pokemon into the realms of kinda good, it literally elevates them off the ground so they become immune to ground type moves. Abilities can do wonderful things, as we'll find out later, but you'll be surprised how helpful it is to eliminate a potential weakness to one whole type and never have to worry about it again. The future is so convenient. Of course, there's ways to counter it, but I think it says a lot when there's multiple different moves and abilities that act as direct counters, which is often necessary considering how much of a boost it is for some. On Pokemon like Coughing and Wheezing, it eliminates one of their 2 weaknesses so that it's just Psychic types that you have to worry about. And it's the entire gimmick of the Electros line with their mono-electric typing that leaves them with no naturally occurring weakness. It's often a bit of a boring ability, which is usually the go-to for any floating Pokemon, but that also led to the glorious sight of Fan Rotom having Levitate despite also being a flying type. It's not for every Pokemon, but it could be. I don't think anyone would turn it down. Unless they had wings. It's hard to tell when Pokemon abilities went a bit crazy and started a trend that's continued to this day of new Pokemon getting abilities that helps them surpass old Pokemon. You'd have plenty of ammunition for saying this has been going on since its debut with the 3rd gen, but honestly I reckon that they started doing this around the time of the 5th gen. That seemed like it had a lot of very broken abilities, and I fucking love it. Though contrary to that statement, a lot of the gameplay features introduced in Gen 5 were pretty solid ideas. Triple and rotation battles were a bit undercooked, but this gen had rustling grass and alternating seasons and was mostly really well balanced across the majority of new things added. I say that with the knowledge that Gen 5 also introduced Contrary as a brand new ability for a handful of Pokemon that reverses stat changes, so that harshly lowering a stat will sharply raise it instead and vice versa. In other words, bad news if your opponent is using Swagger, but it's a great day if you've got Superpower or Leaf Storm, because everything's about to die. This is such a stupid ability, but I for one think it's a wonderful addition. No Pokemon that has it is particularly strong, and the ones that are get their strength from other places that usually involves increasing stats through conventional means, instead of Contrary's backward logic. In order to get the most out of it, Contrary does require you to use a handful of moves that usually lose you a lot of stats, but if you can assemble a moveset that uses as many as possible, you're in for a great, very destructive time. Probably won't catch as many people out as it did back in the black and white days, but it's good for a laugh every now and then. And that's all I need sometimes. Status effects are one of the single most annoying things in all of Pokemon. They're kinda designed to be, with things like paralysis and sleeping being incredibly effective ways of denying opposing players the chance to take part in the game they spent 60 quid on, and any ability that prevents this can be so valuable. They always only prevent one status though, since to stand in the way of more than one would be overpowered and a little too good in a world full of potent status effects. So you can understand my surprise when I found out many years ago that Magic Bounce, a gift given to just a few very privileged Pokemon, not only negates the effects of status affecting moves, but also reflects them back onto the opponent. And damn, that's pretty tasty. Eliminating, or at the very least reducing the threat of status effects is a huge boost that any Pokemon would be lucky to have. Yes, it does sound like I'm trying to sell you these abilities as some kind of black market deal, but hopefully you don't need convincing of the qualities of Magic Bounce since you're hardly getting a bad deal here. Trust me, I make YouTube videos. Both conceptually and in practice, Magic Bounce is such a valuable tool that even if your opponent knows about, they're forced to play around and not throw status moves at a target that will reflect them away with ease. This includes vital entry hazards like stealth rocks and spikes that can end up working in your favor instead, so you really do have to be wary of Magic Bounce's potential to ruin your day. When it's the ability of choice for 3 Mega Evolutions, you know it's something a bit special. Mega Sableye is such a piece of shit. Sometimes you don't need huge game-breaking abilities to get an edge in battle. I wouldn't describe something like Levitate or Intimidate as particularly game-changing, but they can often give you that little leg up to give you a potential advantage in a sticky situation. There's nothing mind-blowing about Technician boosting moves with a low base power so they do a bit more damage, but then you start to unpack what exactly that means for Pokemon that have entire movesets based around attacks that have a base power lower than 60, and suddenly you got some serious firepower on your hands. Primarily because moves with slightly less power to them typically come with secondary effects as a means of justifying their lack of oomph. A lot of Pokemon that have Technician as their preferred ability also come with a large library of weak moves that are suddenly a lot scarier to face with a power boost, ranging from Marsh Shadow punching holes through entire teams of a priority boosted Shadow Sneak to Ambipom doing a lot of free damage with Fake Out, or just Pursuit now being a very strong threat to any opponent regardless if they want to switch out or not, Power Up Punch doing huge numbers while still boosting your attack, and Hidden Power now doing 90 base power in a huge range of flavors. So yeah, quite the handy tool this Technician, and it kinda needed to be with a name like that. If Technician did anything other than make subtle changes to a large amount of moves across the whole of Pokemon, I'd want some kind of refund on that. Obviously not every weak Pokemon move is suddenly incredible now that Technician is here, but it gives you so many more options to consider than simply finding the strongest move and using it to hit Pokemon with over and over again. You know, maybe it's not always the best idea, but it is one of the more interesting ideas to try and implement in your Pokemon battling. Priority moves are now the harbingers of the apocalypse. Who knew? Understanding type matchups is just something that you need to learn when playing Pokemon. I still remember the time I spent as a kid looking up and down at type effectiveness charts that I understood things like what Dark was weak to and what resisted Electric, and honestly, I still do it sometimes these days because Fairy is a relatively new addition and I keep forgetting how some types interact with it. It resists Bug for some reason, and I have no idea why. Mastery of type matchups is a must for getting the most out of Pokemon battling, but there are a few abilities that streamline the process a bit and make it a tad more idiot-proof. Same type attack bonus is a crucially important component where a dark type Pokemon can use a dark type move and have it do a bit more damage, and that's not hard to remember, but if you don't know, you're shit out of luck. Or you could get a Pokemon with protein and not care one iota. I still remember being amazed by Kecleon's color change ability, which let it change its type to the type of the move it was just hit by, since the idea of a dynamic Pokemon typing was just a little too crazy to comprehend for my underdeveloped mind in the mid-2000s. I can't even begin to imagine what younger me would have made of Protein then, where the effect is similar but a lot more controllable and fun to use. Rather than the Pokemon's typing changing when hit by a move, it changes just before that Pokemon uses a move, so that every attack gets a stab bonus and does more damage, giving Pokemon like Greninja and, I guess, Kecleon really impressive offensive capabilities and great type coverage. It actually doesn't matter what type Greninja or Kecleon are, because they can become whatever they want to be, and that's pretty incredible. They're like a weird version of Arceus without needing to hold an item to change into any type. Except Fairy, since neither Greninja or Kecleon can learn any Fairy-type moves. So Arceus stays on top for one more day then. The sign of any good ability is being able to make an otherwise underwhelming Pokemon into a far more intriguing proposition. Not always easy, since there are some Pokemon out there with halfway decent abilities that aren't improved enough to be talked about with any kind of positivity, but I think it all depends on how far the ability goes. Something like Pure Power could never be given to a Pokemon with any kind of decent attack stat because its effect of doubling the attack stat would venture into absurdly broken territory if it ended up on something like Rampardos or Darmanitan. Having an attack stat that functions like it has 200 or more points in it would be too much, which is why Pure Power is an ability exclusively given to the Medicham line with its middling offenses. However, an identical ability called Huge Power was also given to the Azumarill and Diggersby guys. Suddenly I'm a bit more interested because now those Pokemon have a little more use than no, not at all. Oh, and they also gave it to Mega Medicham and Mega Mawile. Oh, okay then. So remember that time that I said an attack stat in excess of 200 would be crazy strong since it would be higher than the natural peak of Mega Mewtwo X's 190? Well yeah, I don't think I'm wrong to think that, but now we've got Mega Medicham with a functional attack stat of 200 and Mega Mawile with 210 to play with, all thanks to abilities that turn underwhelming Pokemon into serious threats under the right circumstances. I'm not sure there's many other abilities that you could have given to these two that would have made them anywhere near as good as they are now, and all that Huge Power and Pure Power did was double a stat. Does that mean we could get abilities in the future that double other stats like defense or speed? I can't wait to see what kind of nightmarish hellscape that leaves us with. I know I said I wouldn't talk about exclusive abilities since they kinda have to be good to warrant their status, but that doesn't mean that I can't talk about some of the slightly more common abilities that aren't exactly handed out like chocolate on Halloween. By my own rules, I can include an ability that only 2 different Pokemon lines have access to, even if those Pokemon are already strong and didn't really need any more help being powerful. Multiscale is a pretty simple ability to understand, but the more you think about it, the better it gets. It halves the amount of damage taken when at full HP, which does sound like a potent defensive tool, but even more so when you realise that the 2 Pokemon who can have multiscale are Dragonite and Lugia. I guess this ability wouldn't have got much use if Shedinja had it. Luckily it's attached to 2 beefy powerhouses that rely at least a little bit on their pre-existing bulkiness. All that multiscale does is double their defenses until they take a hit, after which everything goes back to normal until you can find a way to restore HP to 100%, which will promptly reset multiscale and so on. The thing is that Dragonite sometimes and Lugia usually run some kind of recovery move, and both have access to Roost, so they can heal back some HP, reset multiscale, and remove their flying type if a threatening counter comes in. Plus, the damage reduction on that first hit is typically enough to set up a Dragon Dance or something more stooly like Toxic, which then has exciting ramifications for the rest of the battle and your chances of winning. So, if you're wondering why only 2 Pokemon can learn multiscale, there's a few good reasons. Give it to Shedinja as a hidden ability though, it'd be so goddamn funny. Weather teams are the absolute shit. Easily countered these days, mind you, if just because Game Freak realised that weather teams have so much synergy together that they needed to be a reliable way of stopping them. Ever since weather effects were introduced in Gen 2, they've had subtle ways of influencing the momentum of Pokemon battles, with added bonuses like water-type attacks hitting harder in the rain, and moves like Solar Beam and Growth becoming more powerful under intense sunlight. There's also a ton of abilities that grant extra effects under specific weather conditions, which help to form the backbone of a very strong team that relies heavily on one specific type of weather. And if you can't make it rain, you're not living your best life. Things start to veer into the realms of playing God when you start controlling the weather, and I suppose that moves like Rain Dance and Sunny Day have been around since the 2nd gen of Pokemon, but I always attributed being able to summon weather as something really only that legendaries can do. And apparently, a Pelican. You cannot underestimate any ability that does the same job that an ordinary move can do. Maybe that sounds like you're wasting an ability that could easily be something way more interesting and useful, but often the likes of Tyranitar and Abomasnow either don't have any better alternatives or just straight up don't have any other options. Which is good, we don't need any other options when you can summon a sandstorm at the start of battle and set the rest of your team up really well without even taking a turn yet. And yeah, you don't even have to waste a slot on the relevant move to summon the relevant weather, so you've got a passive ability that drastically changes the field of play and boosts certain moves, while still having 4 move slots to best take advantage of it. Just keep Rayquaza away and you'll be fine. He tends to ruin things. Let's cut the shit and get right to the fact that Speed Boost is fucking terrifying. Not like make sure the cameras are rolling before I play this spooky game so I can scream at this jump scare levels of scary. I'm talking about something so shit your pants frightening that campfire stories have been told since the dawn of 2002, with eyewitnesses describing a demon moving at supersonic speeds and striking in the blink of an eye. You can't run or hide because it'll always catch up and ruin your day faster than you can say Blaziken didn't really need a Mega Evolution. It didn't, by the way, but I think I'm happy with the world we live in where a Mega Evolution has its speed increased at the end of every turn. Just embrace the chaos and see where it leads you. Originally it was Ninjask's special toy for ensuring that it was always faster than the rest of the Pokemon in the roster, but now it's on Blaziken and Scolipede and Sharpedo, and all of these Pokemon are pretty fast as it is, but sometimes it's handy to have an insurance policy in place. If you're able to get a free switch in competitive battling or simply run Protect, you get an automatic speed up without having to do anything too complicated. Combine that with a Swords Dance or something similar, and you've got a certified toe tap and sweep machine in your hands, son, and little that can keep up with it. Mega Blaziken has the perfect ability to beef up its slightly disappointing speed stat, and it's a terrifying threat because of it. I've had easier time sleeping at night. This video was in part inspired by a lot of other similar videos that instead talked about the worst abilities that Pokemon has ever dealt with. There's nothing wrong with that, but it becomes a little more objective when talking about bad abilities, since there are a few that are designed in that way to help nerf a Pokemon. So whereas discussing the worst Pokemon ability will always come back to Slow Start or Truant, talking about the best abilities is more about personal preference and how much you need Prankster in your life. Sableye, bless him, can have Stall, one of the aforementioned bad abilities that ensures that you move after all other Pokemon. Or he can have Prankster, which does virtually the complete opposite and is the bane of many a player. The duality of man for all to see. The scope of Prankster is as endless as you want to make it. It gives priority to status moves, and considering how powerful an ability like Magic Bounce is, purely virtue of the fact that it can reflect status moves, I don't really need to explain how great Prankster is now, do I? You haven't felt irritation until you've come up against a Klefki or a Whimsicott that's running a Prankster set as it throws Thunder Wave after Leech Seed after Light Screen at you before you even get a turn in. Or you can put up a substitute immediately, or guarantee a setup of Stealth Rocks or Spikes, or ensure that one of their best Pokemon is slowly dying of Toxic. It's a simple ability with a straightforward use, but what it can potentially do to an opposing team if gone unchecked is why I think it's the best ability of them all. It single-handedly makes Pokemon like Sableye and Thundurus absolute must-haves in any team. Honestly, you can keep your Wonder Guard. This is RabbidLuigi, and while Prankster doesn't have a ton of use in the average Pokemon adventure, it does have usage in helping a player get into competitive battling. It's hard to understand things like, tiers and tactical switch-ins and whatever, but Prankster offers a simple routine with very easy strategy to understand that the average player can very easily build from. Why play aggressively when you can just be really annoying?